Okay.
Oh, technology these days. Okay. So I think, Kim, you've sent through a list of questions and you wanted to sort of run through them. I've just had a quick look at them. There's some in there about reporting, which it's probably more in your camp than it is in mine. But anyway, we'll just, I guess, far away and we'll go from there. And given there's only 3 of you here, just ask me, I guess, ask questions as we go as well, because otherwise I'm just talking. You know?
Okay, I think that'll work well.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything first, Meredith, before we start?
I'm just saying, if we go through the questions first, and that might sort of draw out a few other issues that we want to bring up. Does that work for you, Jacqueline?
Yeah, but if you just ask the questions, and then I'm sure in my answers you'll probably have further questions, I guess.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll just introduce myself first. So,
yes.
Jacqueline MacDiarmid, I'm a family therapist, couple and family therapist. And so I have been in private practice for maybe close to 25 years now. And my specialisation is in systemic family work, so couple and family work, really. So relationships and parenting and all those sort of things. So I don't work with anxiety or depression, those other things that you might think of, you know, in the psychology field. This is my specialisation. I'm a lecturer in this field and I run a lot of training as well online, mostly at the moment. So this is sort of, family therapy is probably my passion more than couple therapy. I love it. And I am pretty keen to see people trained properly in it, because a lot of people put their hand up and say they will do a bit of family therapy, but they're actually not family therapists. So to be called a family therapist in Australia, you have to have a postgraduate qualification. It has to be at least 2 years, so ideally a master's or a just a postgrad, you know, grad diploma of some sort. And you have to be able to have hours up clinically that correspond with the Australian Family Therapy Association, which is called the AAFT, as a clinical member. So one of your questions that stood out to me was, how do you know who is a family therapist? They should be a clinical member of the Australian Family Therapy Association.
What's your background?
What's my background?
When did you do your training? I'm curious.
I did my training at the University of New South Wales, and there's a whole master's program that was there many years ago, but it's no longer here. So we don't have very much family therapy training in New South Wales anymore.
Is that the one with Carmel Bleskers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. She's retired. So Kim, do you know the? Yeah,
Carmel was one of my supervisors. So
actually, Kim, you said something about this. So yeah, okay. So you're not a lawyer then?
I am a lawyer and I am a therapist. So okay. I started off as a therapist. So I was just curious where you did your background. I do training. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So Carmel is retired now, has been for about 7 years or so, something like that. But we don't have a lot of family training in New South Wales. It's become a little bit bereft, really. But so the home of family therapy is Melbourne, Victoria. So it's all based down there now, mostly anyway. Relationships Australia does put out some good training as well in this field, but they don't put out a kind of a 2-year postgraduate course, which is what the Family Therapy Association needs people to be doing. Like it has to be 2 years to qualify.
So is it like the collaborative professionals, where we go on the collaborative professionals website and check that the sister is registered with that association? So similar to what you were saying in terms of the family therapists, they really should be a member of that association. Otherwise, shouldn't really call themselves a family therapist.
Yeah, they should be a member of the Family Therapy Association.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people, I mean, anybody can say, I can do family therapy. It's
Mm.
not, you know, it's not regulated in the sense of
Yeah.
you can put your, you know, your banner up and say, I'll do. In fact, a lot of therapists these days say, I can do kind of anything, you know, I'll do, you know, individual, I'll do this, I'll do that, whatever else. But that doesn't mean you're trained to do it. So most people who are serious about family therapy have, you know, had formal training, postgraduate normally. It's not undergrad because people have either a psychology degree or social work or psychotherapy, you know, that kind of thing as an undergrad, and then they would go on to do it. And they would be motivated to be a member of the Family Therapy Association and be doing things like going to their conferences and, you know, keeping up to date with what's out there. It's a different tribe to say the Psychology Association or PACFA, which is the other main body. It's quite a different tribe again.
Okay. I suppose I'm just thinking sort of, you know, when we're drafting orders and things like that, where it refers to, you know, parties attend family therapy, it's good to know that maybe perhaps we should think about tacking on and qualifying. Usually I certainly say something like, you know, suitably qualified, but perhaps I should now think about adding the requirement that they are in fact a registered member.
Yes,
a clinical member as well. That's important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, either someone who's got, somebody should have postgraduate qualifications in this, you know, something that's stated, or, you know, or should be a member of the Family Therapy Association. So you could have a master's in this field and not be a member. You don't have to be a member, but people should be able to say how they're qualified and know why they qualified to do family work. And, you know, unfortunately, there are people who fall into it. You know, people come along and, or there are people, I imagine in situations, because I know when I'm contacted by somebody to do court-ordered, you know, mandated work, it's usually pretty, you know, much crisis, and the lawyers are looking for people, you know, to take on someone straight away, and they can't get into someone like me for, you know, ages. And so I'm guessing people find whoever's got openings, but those people who've got openings are possibly not qualified to do the work. They may be kind of wanting to do the work because they don't have.
Sure.
I would even argue that there's some people who are, like, I'm qualified, I've got postgraduate qualifications. However, I don't put my name on the list because it's not my forte. I'm more couple therapist. So I would even suggest that people on the list are actually very competent in what they do. So if you're wanting someone competent, I would suggest, was that what you would think, Jacqueline? The people are registered?
Sorry, Kim, what did you?
The people who are registered on the Family Professional Development organisation, or the Australian Families.
Yeah, the AAFT.
Yeah, then they would suggest that they're pretty competent in what they do.
Yes, and they probably are really immersed in it. You know, they're not just a general kind of therapist. Like, there'd be people who do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, of course, but people who are members of this association tend to be really immersed in this type of work and have a lot of experience in it. So I would absolutely be looking at, you know, what are the postgraduate qualifications that somebody has, and, you know, if they say they've got a master's in family therapy, and you can always challenge it too and say, what does that qualification mean? They don't have to be a member of the AAFT to be, you know, a good family therapist. I know a couple of good family therapists who are not members of the AAFT, but it's a very good guideline, and you will get the majority of family therapists who will be a member of that association.
One of the problems that I see happening, the thing that triggered me to reach out to the association last year, which is when I spoke to, I think it's Paul Goldsmith, who then put me in touch with you, Jacqueline, was that both the lawyers that are in court and the court itself, whether it's the registrars or the judges, seem to have very little understanding. And this often happens, I've seen it happen over many years, where the court grabs hold of an idea and runs with it without having really an understanding of it. I've seen it happen with drug testing. They grab hold of any old drug test, have absolutely no idea how it works. I've seen judges draft orders about doing drug tests, and it clearly reveals that they don't understand the tests themselves, and they completely botch it up because they direct that people go for a certain type of test within a certain type of time frame, and all of it means that the orders are next door to useless. And I'm seeing the same thing happening with family therapy. So this idea comes and lawyers go, oh, great, another solution to our problem. And instead of digging more deeply and saying, well, what is this about? How do we know that we've engaged in this process in any event? And so what I've seen is lawyers who will go and pick someone who has maybe a certificate in family counseling that maybe took them 12 months to get, has no family, not only are they not a member of the association, but has no experience in doing highly conflicted couples work, and family work. And then they get put forward, because the court doesn't know any better, they get put forward as the person that they're going to go and engage in family therapy. Even when you object to it, the court still has no idea. So they will just say, yeah, no, okay, I've got to make a decision here. So that person sounds fine. They don't look at qualifications at all. The court is not asking questions about qualifications when it should. And then you wind up going to these people who are wholly, not only are they just inexperienced, but a lot of what you see comes across as incompetence as well. And I've had, I remember one client who wound up having to go, because the court ordered that they go to see someone who had a certificate, and she had nothing more. She did not have, there was no graduate level degrees. It was just a short certificate. She did mostly workplace change. That was her historical, according to her website, that was her historical work. She didn't understand high conflict between these sorts of relationships. And she stumbled into the whole process and completely made a hash of it that took me about somewhere between 3 and 6 months to unpick with my client. My client was so traumatized by the experience she had with this therapist that it took her a long time to unpick her so that she could start working with this other person as a parent to the child that they had. So, you know, the court can do a lot more damage than it does good when we don't know what we're talking about. And unfortunately, it's often the case.
I agree with that. And also, I suppose, coming from the perspective of, like, at Interrelate, where I'm part of, the counselors or the therapists themselves sometimes get given these orders and they question, why are we being referred to do family therapy?
Yes.
And the order, when it was written, there was no understanding of what is it that Interrelate offers, and whether the people, the parties who are being directed to Interrelate, are they actually getting the help that was initially intended? But I suppose why I made the earlier comment about the registration is, at least at the bare minimum, something we can hang our hat on. And when we do object to the judge, as Meredith said, at least we can say, you know, there is an official registration or somewhere you can actually go and see a list of registered practitioners, and this person isn't on this list by default. And I would say that at least we've got something to sort of back ourselves up to say, if nothing else, the assumption is a registered member then has the suitable qualifications in order to be a member.
Absolutely. And they may even say, like Kim said before, you know, she's got training and qualifications, but she may not feel like she's, you know, experienced enough, or for whatever reason. And there are people who are members of this association. Like, the reason I got sent your email, Meredith, was because Paul doesn't do court kind of work, and not all of us do. I mean, I kind of fell into that years ago, where I ended up getting, you know, people who were going through the family court, but a lot of family therapists don't do that either. You know, they don't want a bar of it. So but at least they're likely to say to you, that's out of my, you know, it's out of my skill set, or I'm not comfortable. They just say no. You know, they're more likely to do that than perhaps somebody else who's just says, oh, okay, I'll give it a go. I've got an opening. I'll take them on. And you can do more damage in family therapy easily. In this work. You can cause more problems for a family than helping a family. You know, we know that all family therapists and their training know that, you know, if we make ill-timed interventions, if we're not, you know, holding the space in a way that should be held, we can make the whole thing worse.
Yeah. So one of the questions, if I remember, that we had there, Kim, although I haven't got them in front of me.
Sorry,
one of them, and just tell me, Kim, if this is one of them or if I've come up with this since, is whether or not it's ever appropriate for someone's personal therapist to also act as a family therapist.
Absolutely not.
That's exactly what I thought. And I've had this argument with the registrar and the other side of a matter. And I'm saying it is on an instinctive level. It just sounds like you can't do it. You have to have some sort of platform to build a relationship with these people on. And if you're already sided with one because you're their therapist, how's the other person going to form that bond of trust?
Oh, look, it starts with the fact that, of course, if you've seen a personal therapist, you know, it's unlikely that personal therapist is systemically trained to do family work. It's really hard to do all the different types of therapies, you know, like learn, you know, like I only have time to be in my little bubble world. And I would say that for any therapist, really. So there's the training aspect of it. And then also, of course, there's no neutrality. It's not best practice.
Yeah.
Anybody who is trained in this work understands you shouldn't be moving between contracts. We talk about contracts for the work.
Okay.
So my contract for a family client, as opposed to an individual, if I see somebody on their own, then the contract for the work is individual work. If I'm seeing a group as a family, my client is the family, not the individuals within that group.
Yes.
So the contract is different, and I can't move ethically between those contracts. I have to think about who best practice, who is my client.
Yeah.
So equally, if I'm working with a family, I don't move into individual work either with any of those family people, you know, any of the members of the family. So it's always thinking about, well, what is the contract for the work? And is it balanced and for everybody? So everybody should start with a family therapist that they have not seen before.
Yes.
Does it change if the therapy started with one parent and the children, and the parties agree and are now wanting to add the other person into the therapy?
You can do that because the contract for the work is family therapy. So there's an umbrella, so to speak, that, you know, you can see all the different moving parts underneath that. And sometimes I don't meet somebody for a while, so there might be somebody in the family for whatever reason. I'm not doing that part of the work yet. But ideally, hopefully you want people to start, you know, together with somebody, because of course, even with somebody coming in late, if it's another parent, for example, they're going to be, you know, wary of that therapist. You know, that therapist has spent some time with the other parent. Of course, there's alliances that occur and so on and so forth. So really, again, you know, when I'm working with families, I want to see both parents, you know, as soon as possible, you know, so that I'm not leaving somebody out, and then I know it's going to be really hard to engage them.
Yeah, I've actually got a case in the back of my mind when I asked that, because the concern is re-exposing the children to another therapist. And there's some allegations in terms of trauma that happened during the relationship, and that's what the current therapy is trying to address. And my suggestion, on my own at the moment, is that the therapy should include the entire family and not just one parent with the child or children too.
Of course.
So,
Unless you can't get a parent to attend, but sometimes you can't. You work with what you've got, you know, if that's the case. But if the other parents are willing to do, join in family therapy, it's great. If he or she, though, then says, look, I want to find a brand new family therapist because, I feel like this is being started without me for obvious reasons, then I would suggest they do start with a new family therapist, because if somebody comes in really wary and even hostile to the situation, they won't work with that. They won't be influenced by that family therapist. And a lot of what we do is influence people to behave better.
Sure.
That we've got to be able to leverage that. We've got to be able to leverage the fact that we can hold, neutrality to some extent, and they never know quite where we're aligned and all these sort of things. So it's has to be, it's quite strategic, this work.
Yeah. How do you balance, the complaint that I often get or raised by the other parent is the overexposure to the kids? And I've heard judges make that comment as well in terms of over counseling children. How do you balance that against, the neutrality then and saying, what the party is willing to engage in this existing family therapy because of neutrality and because the party has now joined late, so to speak, and there seems to be this perceived bias. And then the judge saying, well, I don't want to have to overexpose the children and have them start the whole process again with another family therapist. So it's difficult sometimes, like we're kind of a bit stuck as well when because I get that a lot. I've heard that a lot as well, which is that I can't think of any other, what you've just said is helpful, because now I can sort of rely on that reason, which should already be obvious, but doesn't seem to be obvious. In terms of because as lawyers, as you know, we have this struggle with the conflict of interest issue that, if we can't speak to both parties, and if we're acting for the family, we can't speak to individuals. So it's sort of kind of a similar concept.
I can say that family therapy with children isn't at the same intensity as individual therapy with children. So family therapy the focus is really on mostly the parents, because it's the parents that need to make the changes. The style of work with families is an interview style. So that when I meet children in family therapy, I'm interviewing them to find out, what they'd like to see different, and, relationships and how they see the relationships in the family and those kind of things. But I don't need to see the children a lot in the process. I'm seeing the parents more than I'm seeing the children. So it's not probably, again, this is probably a bit of ignorance on the legal side of perhaps the perception that these children are being dragged into sessions after sessions, whereas I would say, I say to families when I start working with them, that I probably see the children maybe every third, fourth session at the most. Sometimes I don't see kids for a long time.
There is this this misconception that family therapy is quite intensive and involves the children being interviewed quite frequently, and being, I think the term itself, family therapy, and the therapy side of it, that people just jump on that and go, oh, I don't want the child to be seeing therapist after therapist after therapist. And that's the pushback in terms of re-engaging a new person again.
There's certainly times, different situations where you're doing active work, active therapy between people, which is what family therapy is about, between people. But the work that you would see going through the court, going through the family court, it's mostly about, let's face it, conflict between parents and parents not being aligned, and access to children, and a whole lot of bitterness and punitive kind of behaviour. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes on that, gets people into court. It's mostly focused around parents. Once it's there, it's about working with parents on their parenting, of children, helping them communicate about their children, differently or in a healthier way. So when I'm working with the kinds of clients that you would see in your work, I'm perhaps interviewing children once or twice, and I'm mostly working with the parents. I spend, and it's intense for them because I am kind of, telling them what to do and trying to maneuver them into a place to kind of be a little bit, step up a bit and calming things down and sort of trying to encourage them to, put their focus on the best interests of the children and not, punishing each other. So there definitely is family therapy where, children are more involved on a therapeutic level, but I would say the ones that are going through the court are, the focus is on the parents.
Jacqueline, can I ask if there are certain mental health disorders that will eventually make family therapy unsuccessful, or are there things that you watch out for where you just can't get over the line because you've got someone who's their mental health issues are so significant that it's causing a problem? Does that happen?
Yes, absolutely. There are times that if somebody has a personality disorder, family therapy is not helpful for that in that process.
Yeah.
It can be more, it can be damaging. It's just more and more conflict. So if more, sometimes family therapy becomes a space where people can just go for it.
Yeah.
Even more. So there are times, and you'll hear experts talk about this too, the experts that write the reports, often psychiatrists will say, this person it's not suitable for family therapy, and that's why. Yeah. So, there are times when, unfortunately, the only way to go is to put those those safeguards like orders in place, and from a legal perspective, and say, this is what you have to do. Yeah. Because people just, there's no way, they have no intention of working on.
Or even capacity to,
or the capacity.
Do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've got, occasionally come across these. I've got one particular one at the moment where I think the report suggested that dad needed to really get some psych testing done first before anything else should be tried. But of course that then, unless the court orders it, and then you wind up with those people that are ordered to go and get tested invariably become even more difficult because they just won't cooperate with the orders. Yeah. So it just keeps rumbling on.
Yeah.
That sort of brings me to the collaborative law process. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, I'm not quite sure whether you're aware of collaborative law or not, in terms of the process, but I'm wondering if in terms of the red flags, that the personality disorders would be one of them, of when it's not appropriate to use the family relationship therapist in that process.
I'm not really up with the collaborative process, Kim. So not up with that. Did you want to say something about that at all, or?
Meredith, would you like to talk to that?
Well, I think what Kim is just, the collaborative process is it's a method of dispute resolution that lawyers engage in. They can add other, or they offer this as a service to clients. And I suppose in its simplest form, it's where the parties and their lawyers, and we can have other professionals come into the process as well, but just starting with this very simple module, the parties and the lawyers meet together through a series of sessions. They go through and identify the issues and work through the processes they need to for property matters, identify parenting issues, working towards resolution. So it's very businesslike in that you take minutes and you have an agenda and you have a time limit on everything. So it's very methodical, and it gives a really nice structure and a safety structure for those that are going through dispute resolution. But there are certain people that are going to be difficult through the process. In my own practice, I've been doing this since about 2005, and my own observations are that there are certain people, and some of them may be personality disordered. I don't dare to presume to tread on that ground. to identify them, but you do get a sense for when someone's a high conflict person. And I think high conflict people are going to be difficult no matter where you put them. And often high conflict people would be those people with personality disorders, but they're going to be difficult. I actually have, my conclusion at the end of the day is they become more difficult when the matter goes to court. So whilst the court process has lovely timeframes and it has a method to walk through, court is once every few months, but the rest of your life is every day. And the difficult parts for the family are the everyday bits. It's not necessarily going to court, but as soon as you get one of those high conflict people into court, they are going to be seeking to exact revenge or stonewall. They're just going to be difficult. And I'd say, look, most matters, vast majority of matters are going to settle. And collaborative practice is one of those ways that we use to help them settle before they go anywhere near a court. I would say 90%, no, yeah, 90% of my matters, possibly higher, will settle without any need to go near a court, aside from asking the court to approve some orders at the end. There might be another 10% that go on to court, and of that 10%, I'd say another 90% of them will settle before you get to a hearing. It might even be higher again. So very few will flow through to an actual hearing. And in my experience, the ones that do wind up at a hearing, there's personality disorders. There's some really weird stuff going on, at least on one side, if not both. And even where you do have weird stuff going on, sometimes you manage to settle those ones, but the court process itself is not an instrument to assist you there with settling. It simply is a guide to make sure that there is an outcome at the end. So I think that's the process that Kim, and I hope, Kim, I've explained it correctly, is the way you were anticipating. And your question, Kim, was perhaps, as I understood it, was what are the red flags in relation, like how do you identify when a matter is suitable or not suitable for family therapy?
I think family therapy is almost always suitable for anybody who's in conflict, because it does provide accountability. So if I think about some cases that I have where they're in the legal process, and they're in the family therapy process, and if they were not, then the person who was seeking sort of some contact with children, I'm thinking about one case where I've got a father who's not having any access to his children at all, and the mother is showing signs of PD sort of stuff. She's definitely, I have never met her, so I'm not going to say this in an absolute way, but certainly showing signs of it. And the family therapy, he's not doing family therapy with me as such. They're going somewhere else for that bit, because I've seen him on his own and I can't do it. But certainly the process of having a family therapist and being in a legal process is holding her to an account. She has to work with a system. So even though it's tricky on a therapeutic level, and it's really not going anywhere from what I can see, I think the poor family therapist is slowly, just going down a gurgler with them. But there is accountability to kind of behave in a certain way for the sake of the children. The father is able to get some contact at the moment because of that, because the mother sort of is stepping up. There's people around her. So I think almost always, except for when it gets so destructive that it's making it more stressful for the children, and that's when you get that high conflict, somebody who's just not able to take direction from the family, where it's really quite toxic.
Yes.
The other kind of situation would be abuse, actually.
Yeah.
Where you just wouldn't look at family therapy with the whole family, if there'd been sexual abuse or physical, unsafe behavior that you would, or traumatic behavior that you wouldn't re-expose. There has to be some other thinking around that.
Yeah.
In my experience, there's quite a few people that have capacity, but in terms of having got the skills in order to move from being quite positional and negotiating, in two sides in a collaborative process, they don't know how to get to the relationships side. I'm just thinking, the role of a family therapist would be wonderful to help support that process through to so they, in a collaborative manner, so they can start to collaborate around their parenting and collaborate around their behaviour, collaborate around how they negotiate, but not doing it in opposition, but doing it sort of as, what we'd like to see is, co-parenting.
Yeah, and certainly if collaborative is, and Jacqueline, I often describe collaborative practice as it's like there's an element of mediation about it, but it's kind of the older, more sophisticated cousin of mediation. And if it is the place where you can corral most people because it's a process that causes the least amount of damage, then bringing family therapy into collaborative practice actually may be quite helpful. Because there'd be plenty of matters where there's not personality disorders, there's just upset and confusion and fear about their future. And that's what you primarily will deal with in a collaborative matter is how do we do this going forward? It's really identifying, understanding the relationship in a new way from a new perspective. A lot of people will come in thinking that the end of the romantic relationship between the parents is the end of everything, and they'll just think that means you torch every relationship. And collaborative practice is there about preserving those relationships, understanding that the extended family is important to the children and their welfare, understanding that these two are going to have to parent together, and they need to do that in a way that is the best possible way they can. That doesn't change. So it's giving that new perspective, and I suspect family therapy might be really helpful with clients.
Well, given that like a bulk of my work is post-separation family work, there's a whole lot of people out there who don't go near, the legal system at all.
Yes.
But they do seek family therapy, which is amazing and, smart when they separate, because they do need that holding process. So that's exactly what we do on that level all the time. And then we're dealing with step parents who come into the, come on the scene as well. So there's a whole lot of things that need to happen. But initially, when people separate with children, not necessarily without children, but with children, I do think, I spend a lot of time having sessions with different, the different parties, and often reassuring them around, things and helping them to process stuff, giving them privacy for that. But the aim is to funnel them through to, okay, you're now into a business relationship, and your business is your children. That's the business.
Yeah.
So we do that.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your own business? Because I have a bit of an understanding, but I don't know what everyone else here understands your particular business does. As you mentioned in the beginning, you do therapy work, you do training and lecturing. Can you describe that to us a little bit more?
Which part?
Well, the part that we probably as lawyers would be wanting to understand the most is the therapy work and referrals, that sort of stuff. If we've got clients that are coming in, and I've always been of the belief that I would much rather have 10 matters that were easy to settle than one great big matter that goes to court and spends 3 years there. If part of getting those people to settlement is engaging early on in some form of therapy, so they can reconstruct the family, if you like, in a way that so they can move forward, that I could see that as a really valuable service that I could direct people towards.
Yeah. We are couple and family therapists, as I said before. There's only one person who's not a family therapist. He's just does couples. But everyone else does different types of family work depending on their area of interests and expertise. But in a general way, we do family therapy can be anything from adult family therapy. So there might be estrangements and cut-offs and adult families that we're working with, which is also just as tricky as perhaps the families that you might be talking about.
Yes.
We do work with separating families, as I was just saying before. So we get a lot of people who come to us to do that work and to gain the knowledge around parenting. So a lot of people just want parenting help from us.
Yes.
We do work with blended families. So when people repartner again, step families, families where something's happened, you know, and so kids who are off track, lots of kids with ADHD and ASD as a diagnosis, you know, like we sort of deal with that. So it's quite a broad. Family therapy is quite, this is what I said before, you know, I do not have time to do, I don't see, you know, like that's my area.
Yes.
Because it's quite broad enough as it is. But we all have to have, it's quite direct work. So it's different from individual work in the sense that individual work, there's more of a, you know, reflective, it's intrapsychic kind of work. Whereas we, you know, our work is quite direct work. So we're actually telling people what to do a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So we're saying things like, you know, that in my experience, or the child should be doing X, Y, and Z. We're talking about, you know, behavioural things. We're directing parents around a whole lot of things at times. So it's a different approach. And a lot of people in my field struggle if they, you know, if they come to do some training with me, for example, they go, oh my God, like it's really different. And it's like, yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's fast-paced.
What's your theoretical underpinning for that?
It's, well, mine is psychotherapy.
Psychotherapy? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, you mean the underpinning for?
Yeah, the psychotherapy. Yeah. Where did you just?
It's systemic. It's a systemic framework, and but there's quite a few different headings under that. So there's Milan, and there's which you must, I'm guessing you would know.
Absolutely. Yep.
Post-Milan work, and then there's structural, and you know there's strategic, and there's Bowen as well. So there's a whole different frameworks that fall under that. So yeah, but it is a different. You have to be fairly confident to do this work because you're dealing with personalities in a different way.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice when I get an individual every now and again, you know, and I get someone coming through the door and just says, can I just talk to you about my problems? Sure. Quite nice. But I'm not doing, it's not work that is, you know, session after session where people get to reflect on their feelings about something. It is about the problems between people and the problems, you know, in a family system. Does that make sense? It's not, it's things are moved along to okay, how do we problem solve?
Is it the case sometimes that you would recommend parties would go and seek individual therapy outside of the family therapy work, either before engaging or whilst they're going through?
Absolutely. There are lots of times that we're often working in a team. So we have a team approach. So often for me, when I'm working, I have a school counsellor that I'm tic-tacking with if I'm working with kids, or a child psychiatrist. I can be working in a team with a child psychiatrist and a school counsellor. So when I say team, I mean I see myself as being part of a team. We're not actually working in the same business or anything like that, but we work in a collaborative way. So I believe that's really important to move people along in family therapy. You can't work on your own.
Yes.
Without having somebody else also come into the picture and reinforce ideas and make sure things are happening on the other side. And from a family therapy point of view, I tend to be, the family therapist tends to be the conductor and says, I need you to go there. I need you to go here. Can I have a school meeting?
Yeah.
I'd like to talk to the child psychiatrist, or I'd like to talk to their individual psychologist. So you tend to be the one that coordinates all of that.
Yeah. Okay. And is there, and this might be a piece of string question, but on average, how long would families need to spend engaged in family therapy? And I asked the question because the court loves to give us another directions hearing. We're going to bring you back on this date. Is that enough time? And invariably, sometimes it's barely the time between making an order for family therapy and bringing the matter back before the court again might be barely enough to get the parties having made their commitment to the process and engaged in it in a limited way. So it's good to know if there is a time frame that we should be expecting to allow this process to roll on for.
I think it depends on what the problem is. That's really hard to answer because, and it depends on the work that people are prepared to do on the other side. You know, you can be the best therapist in the whole wide world and you won't necessarily get change without somebody people being motivated to make those changes on the other side. As a general rule, you can do this quickly if people are motivated. So you can make an impact in successions, which, you know, over time I do sessions every 2 weeks. So that's like, you know, I guess 12 weeks.
Yes.
But I have families with me that have been with me for a very long time because they just can't, you know, get it together and can't kind of manage on their own. So it just depends what's going on.
Yeah.
But
fortnightly is a distance between 2 meetings that you find is workable.
It depends. I have to do it fortnightly because it's just so.
It's just your workload.
But sometimes people do need those weekly sessions because they are in crisis.
Yeah.
It tends to ebb and flow a little bit.
Sorry?
It tends to ebb and flow a little bit depending on where they're actually at.
Yeah, it just depends where they're at. I find that every fortnight, if people are further along the process, then it gives them enough time to think about things and put things into place. And I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
I was reflecting a little bit. I worked with a family for 12 years. They separated when the children were quite young and went through a whole stage of the different stages of the family successfully in the end. Now they've got family, but, you know, it's around the ebb and flow through that process. And sometimes it would be 7 to 6 months, but you know, they come back in depending on what was happening.
Yeah, when you have, say, you know, you have a child who's really like got a diagnosis of ADHD or something that's tricky, then, you know, quite rightly so, you know, some families really need a lot of support.
Yes.
And help. And other times it's about the fact that, you know, I've got families that I see where parents are so high conflict. They just, you know, can't, you know, they sort of almost have to come to me to sort of make their sort of decisions year by year sort of thing. So it really just depends, but you can do a lot of like this post-separation work that I do. It's normally like 3-4 sessions and most people are on their way because I've got the parenting, you know, I've said the spiel, I've told them how to talk to children, I've told them what to look out for, I've set them up with, you know, what would be reasonable as far as access goes, because, you know, a lot of the time I'm talking to them about, you know, ages of the children and what would be appropriate or the best interest when they're talking about, you know, having contact with them, things like that. So those sort of things can be rolled out in 3 to 4 sessions, and then that's it for a lot of people.
Okay. Another question I had, and again, this is just a practical one and one that we've probably all encountered as a result of the pandemic. But how do you conduct your sessions? Do you find that face-to-face is so important that you make it a requirement, or have you found that doing things via Zoom is also workable in this kind of field?
So when I'm working with family where there's a separated parents, like you would be mostly seeing, I like to see the separated parents on Zoom. I've always liked to do that on Zoom, even before the pandemic, because if I have them in the same room together, it's too much for them.
Yeah.
Too intense. They won't, you know, it's either it goes badly because they get into a big fight or one of them storms out. But Zoom actually gives me a sense of, you know, control, because I can always mute somebody and, you know, delete some. I can always delete them if I want to. But it means that they've got their own space as well, and they've got a sense of security, which is really important sometimes for somebody. You know, if there's been DV or behavior that's been, you know, that's maybe frightening for somebody. All those sort of things are important, I think. When I'm involving children, I prefer to see children in the rooms because they don't do so well online. I mean, sometimes they're okay, but a lot of the time they roll around and, you know, look at their devices and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I have to set up sessions very carefully with separated parents because I have to think about whether I'm going to expose children to parents at the same time. Sometimes I do because parents behave better when there's a child in the room with them.
Okay. Yes.
Sometimes I don't because I know they're not going to behave particularly well and that's going to stress the child. So there's, you know, I have to cut and slice things up. You know, sometimes I do everything on Zoom, sometimes I do a bit on Zoom and sometimes in the room and sometimes I do it in the room, but I never see, hardly ever, do I see parents who are in high conflict in the room together.
Okay. Well, that's also on a practical level good to know. We tend to find one of the downsides, and there aren't many, but one of the downsides of living in a regional area is access to services. And when families are already under stress and they're separated and they're trying to make ends meet or working longer hours, as it often is the case, while they're trying to sort things out, taking a 2-hour trip to Sydney can sometimes be taxing on them and adds to the burden or just even the stress of trying to engage in the process. So if Zoom's already an option that you prefer to use with the parents anyway, that helps us with the options that we've got available to provide for our clients as well.
Yeah, I think it's, if possible, if you're in a regional area, I would say family work would be more focused on the parents, which is useful anyway.
Yes.
And if there was anything to do with children, I think that'd be better off going locally to see somebody by them, you know, for their own work.
Individually, yeah. How are we going with those? I'm just looking at the time, Kim, and how are we going? Did we get through our questions?
We got through all the questions and more. Is there any other questions that, Stephanie, have you got any other questions?
Oh, no, I was just listening, and as you were talking, Jacqueline, I had this picture of the family therapy process happening in the background alongside any process that the parties are engaged in, whether it's court or collaborative or any other sort of dispute resolution. I think it's kind of, for me anyway, it's the missing piece of the puzzle, so to speak. And I often sort of recommend at the first meeting with my client that they do seek the individual counselling. And then I tend to have to confess, sort of recommend the family therapy where there's a semi or fully reached agreement for the parenting agreement. And then I say, go do family therapy alongside to implement it. That's how I've been kind of using it. But I can sort of see, as you was talking, why not sort of have the family therapy process happening on the background, irrespective of whatever is happening in court or any other dispute resolution process, whether it's collaborative or mediation. I think it's actually a very, very valuable thing. And for me, from experience, it's a far easier job for me as a lawyer when the clients come back to me and I feel like they're far easier to deal with and they can sort of see through the fog, so to speak. And sometimes my hands are tied in terms of, you know, there's only so far I can take my client, you know, well, especially at the end of the matter. They need that therapeutic assistance to implement. They've got an agreement, fantastic. And often in court, I get the experience is, there you go, seal orders, off you go, hand holding in the sunset. And there's no help to anyone in terms of how do we do this now?
Yes. It's easy for us to close our files, but these people have to keep living, don't they?
Yeah. I cannot stress enough that I think there is a lot of value in anybody who separates and going to seek family therapy straight up. Even as I said, for 2 or 3 sessions, you know, anxiety is so high. Understandably, everybody's scared about loss, you know, and what that means, because of course with children, it's immediate loss. Whichever way you look at it, there's often financial loss, as you know. There's, you know, it's a family therapist or someone who works with post-separation can immediately just reality check and reassure and, give information that just helps that anxiety or keeps people contained and or held in a process, and gives them somewhere to talk. Like often people talk to me about things that are happening, in the legal side of things, with their, often I'm talking to their lawyers too. Sometimes they bring their lawyers into, they Zoom into sessions. I've had that happen recently. And it's fantastic because I know enough, and hopefully other people like me do know enough where I can say things like, I think, what's going to happen is probably something like this. And, I really encourage you to do X, Y, and Z. Do you really want to spend the money on blah, blah, blah? And, all those sort of things that just help take the anxiety down and have people think about making better decisions of pushing for something that is going to cost them a hell of a lot. And
Yes.
I don't think I've ever seen anybody come out of a legal process, a long one, without being fairly traumatized.
Yeah, I haven't seen anyone come away from. I've never had a client who says, I want to go to court. And I've never had a client say at the end of going to court, gee, that was good. Or, they're usually so relieved it's over. That's all that they're relieved about. If there's a smile on their face, it's because it's over. And I often have this conversation with my clients, which is we can be, when the lawyer is sided with one party and the other party has their lawyer. So we're on different sides. That's how that's perceived. And so we can have the right message, but we're the wrong messenger. And so it doesn't matter how much you want to convince the other side that the sky is blue, they are not going to accept that, although we don't often see it these days, but they're just not going to accept it. And so having someone like a family therapist who's able to sit neutral in the middle and then be able, as you said, with a very direct approach, gives them some structure to work with, and is able to help build their confidence up as they walk through into this great unknown territory. It really takes a lot of the feeling like you're yelling into the wind, feeling out of it, if you can have that process going in lockstep with the dispute resolution stuff that they need to work towards in terms of the legal division of property and formalizing, if any, of parenting.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not dealing obviously with the property settlement or financial, although I hear about it, but it's not something that I'm working on actively with people.
But the work that you're doing will help set them up for their ability to negotiate. And all that work that you do around parenting, it's the same negotiation skills that we need them to have when they engage in the property stuff as well. And if they've been calmed down through a family therapy process, then they're not going to go tearing off down, chasing, as I call them, rabbits down holes, and getting anxious. And even a lot of people become quite paranoid about things. Collecting data is, for a property matter, the beginning is all about just collecting data. It's called disclosure. And it sounds like it should be a simple process. In theory, it's a very simple process. Just swap your information. It is often the part that takes the longest, because everyone is in such conflict and there's such a sense of anxiety and suspicion of each other that they just don't settle through and get into the next phase. And once you've got your data collection and your balance sheet sorted out in property matters, the rest of it's actually your home and hosed. And that's really because by the time you get that process done, people are starting to settle into and not be quite as paranoid and anxious in the matter, but it can take a long time to get there. So I just think if there's a family therapy process, it helps give them a model to work with. So you might be working with them as parents, but you're giving them also a model to work with elsewhere as well. And I think it can be really valuable to all aspects of family law.
I also want to say that you can do family therapy just with one party, and I do that, at times as well. And that is beneficial. If you can't get everybody to go to the same person, it is beneficial at the very least to have that one person go off. And, sometimes, I mean, you would have the clients that they don't really help themselves. They shoot themselves in the foot because they shoot off, the odd bad text message to their ex, or, you know,
Yes.
the people that you kind of go, oh my God, why'd you do that? And,
Yes.
you know,
Yep.
so it really does help for at least one party to be seen, somebody who can say, okay, right, well, why did you do X, Y, and Z? Like, you know, I'm working with somebody on his own and have been for a while, and he needs a lot of parenting help. He's been an addict. He's got to prove that he's, you know, clean and sober after, you know, to get contact with his children. And I'm doing things like his lawyer says to him, you showed Jacqueline this, and you know, and she expects me to go, now listen, next time you see the kids, don't comment on their weight, and, you know, please don't do that. And before you contact your ex, please just take 5 minutes and go and calm down, and maybe just don't call her, and don't do it. Like, I do all that stuff that I know his lawyer is not, just wants, you know, is going, oh my God, like
just a nightmare client.
Yeah, nightmare client, because she's desperately trying to get him to get the contact with his kids. And so what I'm saying to you is that, yes, there's a family therapy process, of course, for the whole family, but if all else fails, think about it, you know, on the side of the client that you're seeing as well, just because it will help.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good tip.
Well, on that note, I think that's a good way in terms of ending up to communication. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. It's been very informative, and we've been delightful hearing your expertise and knowledge in this area. Does anyone else want anything to say before we finish up today? I'll just turn it.
No, thank you.